sunny shores of Bainbridge Island this summer, where the Pacific whispers, secrets, and towering cedars hold court in the clouds. If you've been here with us before, you know this journey that we're on together, diving deep into the living heart of poetry where words refuse to stay quietly on the page. For those just joining us, you've stumbled into something beautiful, a place where verses break free from silence and poetry becomes the wild, untamed thing that it was always meant to be. This is our 25th episode. I can't believe it's 25th episode. 25 times we have gathered here to witness the magic that happens when poetry meets the human voice, complete with all of the pauses, the raw honesty, the verse. 25 times we've proven that exceptional poetry doesn't just speak to you, it rewrites something inside of you. By day, my husband Ben and I tend to Bainbridge Island Press. We are nurturing the brave souls who crack open their hearts and they let their fire spill onto the paper. But here on Poetics, we take those poems one step further and we set those words free. Today, we are exploring Sexier Times, which is a lot saying for me. I'm a little modest. But there's something elusive about the poetry that can transform even the darkest verse into light. We will venture into that peculiar, the magnificent, the crushing, the transcendent, and we're going to dig deep into where the real poetry lives. So, whether you're a longtime poetry lover, whether you're someone whose last encounter with verse was writing it in the back of a book, something is bringing you here. Welcome back to the most electrifying literary gathering you'll find on the web. Let's dive in. Welcome to POETICS Podcast. Okay, so today we are going to be exploring some of the poetry in the chapbook that we have available on Express Digital Chapbooks. The title is The Sentient Flock in Simpler and Sexier Times. It is by Noah Berlatsky. I loved how this poem utilized the mundane and the imagination and created this beautiful kaleidoscopic narrative. It's a section poem, so it's one long poem in sections. It is weaving together the fragments of modern life, of corporate culture, of social media, of consumerism, of politics, of mythology, and it almost has this hallucinogenic narrative to it. There are references to the landscape of Amazon, Prime Days, Bitcoin, social media billionaires. There is a satirical commentary about digital culture. It was just so interesting, and it's hard to write satire. I don't know if you've tried to write satire. It's challenging because on one hand, you want to address very specific things in our culture, and on the other hand, you don't want it to just sound like an essay whining about something. Berlatsky did a really lovely job at combining the absurdity and also the reality that we have accepted in American culture, at least in some of it right now. I mean, there's a lot of things in American culture that I'm just saying that overall with the pop culture, this is what he's referencing. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it first before I get into anything else, because I want you to see what language the poet is using and also where it is leading. And then we'll get back to analyzing it. Okay, here we go. 1. Well, I've pawned my insomnia-weary double flute of corporate sponsors, and now the night is redolent with sophisticated slices of retro soul with positivity and humor you can't ever really contain, except perhaps on the toilet, when it would have sounded fresh even in the 70s, lowering the tea bag into the storm of prime day where the clock is ticking on pricing for the late birds floating in dog vomit on the very edge of the Persephone legend. 2. But of course, now it is updated as a rom-com in which one small crow owns the last digital of men's personal wizard with a fat paycheck, and the interrogative is that she will fall for the zombie and the seeker suit and the Achilles tendon of the nation's leading presidential historian gently flopping insouciant but tender between his incisors. 3. I know that's for later, but when the strong processed organs and the beloved memorists they crave consummate their dawning bureaucratic mishap with the first-hand account of unforgotten magnates, sampling scripts of spicy vocabulary, unzipping the errant circuit until conservatism springs forth or sags instead into a girl talking of finance, which bridges all divides or sometimes doesn't. 4. And so, Osiris chortles like a bumpkin, gnawing on his first Bitcoin amidst the nightshade, while honeybees make strontium from the used car mailers, and the brackish social media millionaires flow together like an astrological chart for large toads hopping into bratwurst and nostalgia, smelling the heartbreak of think tanks and the fake to real love affair with tipping when you have to send the burger back for insufficient funds or just too much anyway. Okay, I'm just going to go 1 through 4. First of all, I need to make it abundantly clear that I think that I mispronounced at least 3 words. I'm a reader. I rarely say them out loud. I probably did. I'm sorry. Okay. Also, before we get too far into the poetry, I need to tread upon some terminology and definitions first. I want to discuss the definition of postmodernism literature. Now, if you've heard of postmodernism before and you like it, then you're going to be like, yay, postmodernism is so much fun. And if you've heard of postmodernism before and you hate it, then you're going to listen to all of this and say, this is the downfall of literature. I've seen both. I have seen both sides. And what's really fascinating is this is a black and white issue for a lot of book groups. Either postmodernism is the downfall of Western society and all of the achievements that we've made in literature, or it was a very brief foray into something counterculture and something really fascinating and utilizing the imagination and combining pop culture into formal academia. It depends on how you feel. I have had people read postmodern literature and they're like, this is so fascinating what they've done. I've also been yelled at until I've been screamed out of the room. So that is kind of the disclaimer that I'm trying to protect myself. It's really fascinating. It's literature. Let's just go with it. Okay. Postmodernism. What is it? It is a genre that came after modernism. That's what it is. Modernism was in the early 20th century. It was breaking free of a lot of systems and structures that came from the Romanticism and from Classicism, and it was allowing the self to be more present in poetry on one hand. Robert Frost was a wonderful modernist poet. He wrote about his farm. It could be debatable of who the first modernists were. Generally, I have accepted it's Dickinson and Whitman. They were kind of the first. I've heard one person say that it was Byron. Let's just take Byron and put him on his own pedestal where he can be adored on his own. We'll just leave him there. Okay, back to postmodernism, or modernism. The first real poem that is the first modernist poet or poem is arguably, but also accepted as The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. I have done numerous workshops analyzing The Wasteland. It is very wonderful, and it is not complicated, but no one remembers, and so I'll do that another time. It'll be like a 1 billion part series. So modernism, it just was including all these things. Edna St. Vincent Millay is a wonderful example. So that was up until about like 1933, 39, maybe later, but around there. All right, postmodernism was after 1945. So it is after World War II, and the world is different. I mean, the world was different after World War I, as we can clearly see in The Wasteland. But the world after World War II was even more different. And postmodernism came out of that. Some of the figures in that period was Don DeLillo and The Crying of Lot 49 and some others that I can't remember because I didn't write them down. Really, this is Ben's department, and I really should have had him do this, but I'm here, and I really like this poem. All right, so some of the key characteristics of postmodernism. Why is it different? It is a reaction against modernism. It's characterized by skepticism toward grand narratives. It is embracing fragmentation. There's blurred boundaries between high and low culture. Modernism was seeking forms to express universal truths. Postmodernism questioned whether such truths existed at all. So some of the key characteristics are metafiction, stories about storytelling, pastiche and parody. So pastiche means it's obviously a French word, but it's just putting a lot of different types on top of each other, kind of a collage. And parody, irony as the dominant mode, fragmented narratives. There's a cultural critique through appropriation, and a lot of media consumerism, capitalism, information overload. Those are key characteristics. An example I'll get into David Foster Wallace in a second, but we'll talk about Don DeLillo first. I have a great appreciation for Don DeLillo. It took me a long time to read White Noise because it's so suburban. And I know it's ironic. I know it. But like the first 2 chapters, like you're inside of a station wagon and he's explaining all the lines that of parents that are dropping their kids off to college for the first time, and the trunks and the suitcases and all of the rituals, and he's looking forward to it. It's always something that's really nice. White Noise is a really good example of postmodernism because on one hand, I don't know if I should tell you the plot. I'm not going to. You should read the book. They also made a movie out of it with Adam Driver and some other people. I thought they did a good job. But it is a hyperfixation of this suburban life that some of us live in. Well, I don't anymore. I fled to the forest. But with going into box stores and seeing just boxes and boxes and boxes of the same type of cereal. It's the Campbell's soup can epidemic. It is, instead of buying food, you're buying cans, and just this corporate system of food and meals as opposed to buying potatoes or processing a chicken. So White Noise, hold on, I'm going to see what year, because I think it was 1949. Well, I'm glad I looked it up. It was published in 1985. Completely not 1949. There was others that were in 1949, but White Noise was not. It was 1985. It's just a defining work of postmodern American literature. Okay, so let's talk about David Foster Wallace. I like his short stories. There was one that I read. It was really the first short story that I read from him, because I avoided him like the plague, because during my undergrad season, number one, I was not focusing on postmodern literature. It was just basic undergrad American and British literature. I read The Yellow Wallpaper. I read Mary Shelley. I read Edith Wharton. I read just basic. All right. So David Foster Wallace is a contentious figure. That's all I'm going to say. I'll just talk about his work. He has written work that is critiqued as postmodern techniques. His fiction used postmodern tools, endless footnotes, self-referential asides, genre mixing. He, in his essays like E Unibus Plurum, he argued that postmodern irony had become a dead end. He said it created distance rather than connection. He hated postmodern, mostly because he didn't want to be in a box, and we were trying to put him in a box. But, what are you gonna do as critics? He used culture, and he used all of the postmodern irony and references in his book. So one book that he wrote is Infinite Jest, and that, is it 2,000 pages? Is it 1,600 pages? It's a heft of a book. To say that it used a fragmentation style is really putting it lightly. The one that was published, I believe posthumously, was The Pale King, and that I always loved the first page of that. It was very beautiful, and that was about working in a postal office. Is it an homage to what's his face that starts with a B that wrote Ham and Rye? Bukowski. Anyways, so the reason why David Foster Wallace is, he's an interesting writer. I like his writing. His writing is really interesting. he has a book of essays. It's one of my favorite books to read. It's beautiful grammar. The language is elevated, and it's unapologetic. And I appreciate that, because if we're going to do a small analysis of myself, I seek to be a peacemaker, and I also am battling with myself to not be a wet rag. So how do you take conflicts and not be a wet rag, and also not, burn bridges? David Foster Wallace just did not have this problem. He wrote very unapologetically, and I think that I live vicariously through that, because I'm never going to do that in my life. Let us consider the lobster. I actually painted a picture of this. It's actually next to my desk, and I just like it mostly because I painted a lobster, and that was harder than I expected. Consider the Lobster was an essay that he wrote. It exemplifies this postmodern consciousness while also bridging its limitations. It was a piece that was just food journalism, but if you've read David Foster Wallace, it never is about one thing. So it starts out as food journalism about a lobster festival, and then it spirals into this philosophical meditation on animal consciousness and consumer culture and moral responsibility. And he's using these postmodern techniques of self-interruption and meta-commentary and acknowledgement of his own privilege and contradictions to employ this genuine ethical inquiry of detachment. So the essay's famous question is it all right to boil a sentient creature alive just for our gustatory pleasure? And that is the most perfect bridge into the poetry that we have today. Okay, so we understand postmodernism. It's ironic. It is fragmented. It is it doesn't need to be gross, and it doesn't need to justify itself. It is saying it, so that's what it is. In this, let me make sure that I'm saying all of this right, because I don't want to have to record it again. Okay. The Sentient Flock in Simpler and Sexier Times. That is the title. As I said before, it is a section poem. It's just one long poem, but it weaves together the fragments of modern life, of corporate culture, of social media, of consumerism, of politics, of mythology. There are zombies, there's ancient gods, there's contemporary figures, there's Amazon Prime Days, there's Bitcoin. And why would you want to write a poem about this? It is a collage that mirrors this fragmented, overstimulated experience of contemporary life. I'm going to ask you, how many times have you checked Instagram today? How many times have you scrolled through the news? What we have is an overstimulated experience of contemporary life. And that's just the way it is. We are just going to accept that for this podcast. That's how most of us live. This poem is operating as a cultural criticism and as a linguistic experiment. It is using absurdist juxtapositions to reveal this underlying chaos of our media-saturated world. There is ancient mythological figures. There's Persephone, Osiris, a few others. It's also using references. He references Kenny G, who deserves to be in a poem at some point. But these are the external struggles playing out in digital contexts. And I think that is really interesting. That is why I really like this postmodern genre, is because it's taking these eternal human experiences and playing them out in modern contexts. And isn't that exactly what Langston Hughes was doing when he was writing about finding love in a diner and playing the jukebox and feeling the hot street of Harlem? Isn't that exactly what he was doing? This is my world. This is what it looks like. And you know it. And it forces you to acknowledge not all poems are on hills with daffodils, even though those are very nice. Not this one. Okay. So there's a few interesting things about the language. There's the mythological code switching, which I always like because I like classical references. I love the wasteland. But it's also treating ancient gods and modern celebrities with equal surreal reverence. They are equivalent roles of cultural, archetypes. Berlatsky is creating these compound phrases that shouldn't work, but they do. We have insomnia-weary double flute, brackish social media billionaires. Oh, okay, I'm going to mispronounce all of this. His language, his vocabulary is just bigger than mine. It's oleaginous detumescence. Oh, I'm just destroying it. You can read it. You can read it and pronounce it correctly on your own. There's a high literary diction with a contemporary slang. It creates this unique linguistic structure. That's why I liked it. There are some surprising things about this poetry. There was a romantic undercurrent. Despite the chaotic surface, there is a genuine romantic thread running through the poem, especially in sections 6 and 10. Love is emerging. He said, I was never more in love than at this moment. And that is unexpected in this cultural debris. There is a coherent narrative arc. What initially appears to be a pure stream of consciousness is actually this loose but discernible journey from corporate alienation through mythological transformation to kind of a transcendent acceptance. Okay, with the structure, we have a numbered fragmentation, we have tonal shape-shifting, we have recursive imagery, we have key images like birds, technology, bodily functions, ancient myths, and it all spirals back throughout the sections in new combinations, creating this sense of obsessive return that is mirroring both the poetic tradition and the social media algorithms. I was so grateful to have this submitted. I think that this poem captures a psychological reality of living in this digital capitalism better than most contemporary poetry that I've read. I think that Berlatsky has created a work that is of the moment. I think it's timeless. I think he's using avant-garde techniques to make sense of our cultural moment's particular brand of chaos. I think this poem manages to be both hilarious and unsettling. I think that there is a linguistic mirror to our fragmented, commodified world while never losing sight of the genuine human emotion and connection. I think that this poem is essential reading for understanding how poetry can respond to and make meaning from the overwhelming complexity of contemporary American life. And that is all for today, poetry friends. Now, if you've enjoyed diving into the world of postmodernism and verse with us, please join us next time. We've got more poets to meet, more poems to explore, and more literary adventures to share. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, and keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for joining POETICS podcast, where we bring poetry to life, one verse at a time.